Hi, good evening. I am going to present a demo on Oracle Web Commerce ATG Training. Before I begin, let me talk something about myself. And I have more than 9 years of experience, particularly in ATG Commerce and Java J2E in Spring Boot. Currently, I am working as a senior technical lead with my organization, and I provide solutions to the complex requirements and also act as a client stakeholder. So I have a certified Oracle Web Commerce 10.x certification. And above that, I have worked on several projects in the e-commerce domain with different models such as waterfall as well as agile. Talking about my qualifications, I have EPGDM in project management, which is equivalent to MBA, and I am BTech in computer science and engineering. So the scope of this demo will be, I will be talking about the ATG framework and what is its architecture. And to begin with, what is the nucleus and what is the component? So this will be the scope of today's demo. Moving forward, let me go to the course outline. So we'll be covering introduction to ATG, then ATG site and server configurations. We'll be also configuring the databases. We'll talk about ATG servlet beans, forms and form handlers. We will talk about dynamic pages, which is nothing but our works on JSP and DSP tag libraries. We will also talk about configuring ATG components and repositories. So since we will be using repositories, we have to know about repository handlers. And we also need to know about how we are going to manage the cluster and distributed site. Because if you see in today's production, we don't use one server, we have multiple servers, and how to configure the cluster is one of the major things we are supposed to know. ATG services, which is nothing but the current JAX, ARES, and REST. Data collection and logging is coming as out of the box ATG model. ATG message system is nothing but how we are configuring our messaging and emails. We will talk about search engine optimization. So here we'll talk something about Indica search engines and transaction management. We'll talk about internationalization, which is like translations of one language into other languages. And finally, we'll talk about testing, deploying, and monitoring of the application, and then the asset management. Asset is nothing but our products, SKUs, categories, etc. And we'll talk about this deploying commerce application. And finally, we will have a practice test and interview questions. So if you see the course outline, it will be end-to-end ATG, like from initialization phase to the development phase, and then testing and monitoring and deployment. With the add-on topics which I would like to cover together with this course outline is something which will be very important to the projects, is like customization of commerce pipeline, which talks about the commerce in ATG regarding order management, and also how the cart and checkout and order pricing works. Pricing engines are used in ATG to calculate tax prices, shipping prices, and etc. And then we will talk about something about integration with third parties, because ATG as a standalone doesn't work in practical world. So there has to be integration with third parties like web methods or SAP. We also need to know about JAX, ARES, and REST services, and how to expose ATG modules as a REST API. Okay, within this course, we'll be providing you with PPT and PDFs. The PPT which I will be sharing on for the class, and PDFs will be related to what the Oracle provides. Documents from Oracle. Oracle has a huge documentation when it comes to ATG, from installation to troubleshooting to you can say it's most of the things. KT documents will be like knowledge transfer documents for the specific things which I have learned in the industry over the past 9 years, which will be helpful for you. Troubleshooting guide is again something which I will be creating for the normal errors and issues which we face generally while doing ATG deployments and ATG implementations. And then also I'll cover basic interview questions. So currently I am also acting as one of the interviewer in the interview panel of my company. And so basic interview question is something which I will be able to help you out with. What questions are asked today and what will help you to crack the interview and to get into the company is something very important, and that serves the purpose of this training. Okay. Projects these are the few highlights of the projects which I have worked on. Like one for the first project we talk about is Endeca migration, and the main focus of the project was to create Endeca Experience Manager and ATG Commerce migration from Force to CAS. So maybe you won't get it. Once we go with the classes, you will definitely understand what I'm trying to convey out here. And then second one is customer service center project, which was designed for one of the biggest giant in UK. For that, which I have been, I was working on in Southampton, United Kingdom, and was acting as a client stakeholder and this lead designer. So, what all things do we need to actually get started? Before I begin any topic, this is one of the important aspects on how are we going to move forward. The first one is the prerequisites, like what we need to get started. Since ATG is a licensed version, ATG requires a license, and it can be used by developer only for the developing mode. For that, we need Oracle e-delivery cloud login to download the softwares, ATG Web Commerce Developer Edition, and JDK 1.8, which serves as a base of ATG. Talking about the system requirements, we need a minimum of 64-bit Windows 10 or any Linux environment, including Red Hat or Ubuntu. Anything works. Minimum processor speed should be 1.8 gigahertz. 8 GB RAM is the minimum RAM which I'm talking about, because ATG servers are heavy and it takes a lot of the resources. 8 GB Windows system will help you serve the purpose, but recommendation is above 8 GB RAM. 128 GB SSD is solid state drive. If you go with HD, server is going to be very slow, so the recommendation is SSD drive. We can talk about JBoss or WebLogic. That depends on what we actually want to learn. The Oracle provides multiple integration with different servers, including JBoss, WebLogic, WebSphere, etc. And we can talk about what all SQL we need. So we have MySQL, Oracle, SQL Server, etc. And Oracle ATG is nothing but data anywhere architecture, which means it's not dependent on what database we use. It may basically works on the repository functions. And so database is of our choice. So we can use any database. Accordingly, we will proceed with the integration and it works fine. And then we will be discussing about some of the mock interviews in the session, and which will help you to crack any type of interview. So this is the basic thing which I'm going to do. Now let's talk about some things about the agenda which I discussed earlier. So after giving this outline, we can talk about what ATG framework is, what is the architecture, what is the nucleus component, and what actually is the component. So ATG introduction I would like to give is ATG is called Art Technology Group. So it was standalone earlier and then acquired by Oracle in 2010. And ATG is an e-commerce platform which provides out-of-the-box features in order to create a self-sustainable e-commerce website, which starts from content loading to cart and checkout and finally the payment. So ATG is nothing but it's a framework. Okay, it provides few things out of the box, means it automatically it gives multiple things which we can use directly to cater the need of our requirement. But most of the time, it also acts as a base for us to enhance the architecture, to enhance the features, because what ATG provides might not be used directly, but maybe we can build component on top of that. Talking about the architecture of ATG is like ATG is mainly data-aware architecture. Okay, so ATG architecture has mostly data-aware architecture, which means that we can use any database in the backend. Any database in the sense we need to configure the database for sure. That definitely it is. So ATG has a management server, which like mostly we will talk about ATG store server, which is nothing but our where the pages loads and from where we do all the work. Okay. Then we have something called as ATG merchandising server. ATG merchandising server is something called BCC. BCC is Business Control Center, which is provided by out of the box ATG. So what BCC does is it helps the merchandisers to use it as a tool to import the um, contents. Basically, they manage the catalog, manage the product, manage other assets like PDF and images, etc. So that's what BCC helps with. And BCC talks to something called as versioned database. So we have two types of database in ATG. One is non-version database and another one is a version database. BCC talks to the version database because it has to keep track of who is logging in BCC, who is doing the changes in BCC, and what assets have been modified. For that, we need version database. Second type of database is unversion database, which is generally our basic core schema where we record our user details, where we record our prices, where we record our order management. Those tables are part of unversion database. Version database, again, we have like catalog, any assets what we talked about are the version database. So version database needs three schemas basically. The first one is what we call as a publishing schema, or we call it as a pub. So the publishing schema, it is what the merchandisers first log into and do the changes. Once the changes are done, it goes and commits all the changes into publishing schema. Till then, the changes are not reflected on the store server, which means it is not reflected on the website. Okay. So second thing is, once the changes are done, then there is a workflow in place, because nobody is allowed to directly go and do some changes on the production website. So the workflow allows them to go through a particular approval process so that they can use that approval process in order to mitigate any risk done to the production server. For example, if I go and change some description of a product, and I do it as a merchandiser, so somebody has to be there who can check those changes and can approve that, okay, yes, the changes are totally fine and we can move ahead. So for that, there is approval process. Once the approval is done, then we go ahead and we have two more schemas. One is cat A and another one is cat B, or you can call it as a catalog A or catalog B. Now this catalog A and catalog B, these two are identical schemas. Now the question arises, why two? Why do we have two schemas? And the main reason for having two schemas is we don't use both of the schemas at the same time. One schema lies idle. So suppose our production site, our store is running on, suppose cat A. So it is using all the data of catalog A. It is showing us all the data from catalog A, which means catalog B is idle. Okay. So once catalog B is idle, that means I can go ahead and change catalog B anytime. It won't reflect in the production. So what the workflow does is, from the publishing changes, it commits all the changes to catalog B, because that is an idle schema. Once the catalog B changes are done, then second approval process is to switch it. So what it does is it switches the database. So if my website is currently running on catalog A, it will again change the switch to catalog B. Now my website is running on the catalog B and with the latest changes. And now catalog A is idle. And then subsequently, all the changes are checked into catalog A, but we don't switch again. So basically, catalog A and catalog B are duplicate schemas. This is required to be duplicate. There cannot be any change between them because BCC helps them to switch one after another. This helps in doing the changes without having to restart the server, without having to go ahead with any uh, server deployment process. This helps them to directly do the asset changes directly in the BCC as a tool, and nobody knows. Like if you and I are looking at the website now, currently we won't be knowing the changes. We won't be knowing that okay, site is going down. It will suddenly change. So that's how it helps. Okay. Apart from this, we have something also called a state server. So a state server is an optional server. Why I call it as an optional server is because you might choose or might not choose to have a staging server in between. Staging server actually helps us or helpfully help the merchandisers to do a preview. Before moving into Cat A and Cat B, if we have one more schema, say stage, and we do all the changes in a stage and we call it a stage server, then we can do a preview of our changes, how it will look on the live website. For that, there is one more layer called a stage schema, but that is totally optional. It depends on projects to project. If in my project I need to review how it looks before I push to production, then yes, we need a staging schema. In case we don't, we are fine with directly pushing our changes to production, we might not need the staging scheme. So basically, this is what ATG architecture is all about. And so I talked about mainly five types of database. One is the publishing, one is catalog A, one is catalog B, one is stage. And the last remaining one is what we call as the core schema. Core schema is our non-version or unversioned database, what I started. Unversioned database means we don't need to track the changes because those changes are not done by the merchandisers. So basically the tables related to profile, basically the tables related to the price, basically the tables related to the orders are present in the core schema because there is no constant change which will be required. If I am a user and if I create my profile, that means only I have access to change my profile. No merchandiser should be given access to view the user data or to change the user data. And that is why tracking is assumed not to be needed. Okay. Second thing is if I place an order, that order has to persist. That is a data integrity question. Once I place an order, we cannot modify the order from our side until and unless we give the customer rights to change order after order placement, which generally doesn't happen. Changing, exchange, return, modification of order is generally taken care by the service center, which is separate, which is not part of the store. For example, if you take Amazon, you go and do place an order. You cannot directly go and change the order. You might cancel the order. There is a possibility to cancel the order, but you cannot modify the order. Modification, if you need any modification, including the address, including the product which you have ordered, that needs to be taken care once only you call the service center. Otherwise, from our side, we cannot do the thing. The same thing applies to any e-commerce website. Talking about e-commerce website, there are two types of e-commerce website. That also is very necessary to be known. The first one is B2B. B2B is nothing but business to business, and second one is B2C, business to customer. So business to business are the models which only deals with the business people. There is no access of general people like general customer to create or to register on the website and order the products. If you take an example, like if you are registered business, then only you can go in a contract with another business and you can order the bulk products. That is business to business. Business to customer B2C is like Amazon, like Flipkart, where anyone can log in, anyone can register, anyone can place the order. We don't need a specific contract between us to place the order. So that is B2C. Okay. Now let's move on to the nucleus. So what nucleus is? Nucleus, if I talk about nucleus, is provided by ATG. It's like a concept. It doesn't have its own functionality. Nucleus is a concept in itself, which allows organization of or organizing of multiple components. I will talk about components in a while, but nucleus is only organizing all the components in a way that what component needs to load as per the desired requirement. Okay. Now let's talk about component. So component, if I talk about component, is in lame words, it's a properties file. Okay. Anything dot properties is a component, and component always has a class associated with it. When I talk about class, technically speaking, it's a Java class. Okay. Basically, this ATG is built on top of Java J2EE, and Java J2EE serves as a base of ATG. So if anyone who is not aware of Java, who is not aware of Java J2EE, cannot start learning ATG directly. To start learning ATG, this is the prerequisite that you should learn. You should know Java, at least Java J2EE in a way that you can actually write JSPs and you can actually do server level configurations. That much Java knowledge is needed. So component will tag along with a Java class. A property file, it will tag along with a Java class. Okay, and it will have a scope. So what is the scope of a component? The scope of a component is till when this component will be alive. Okay, generally speaking, few component scopes are global, request, session, and window. So this is self-explanatory. Global components will live throughout the server is up. Okay, if there is anything what if we're setting on a global component, it will not change until and unless we want to change it won't. And second one is session component. So session is basically defined by the user session. Suppose I go into a website, that means I am logging as an anonymous login. I have not logged in the website, but still the session is created. The session is created for an anonymous user. I have not logged in. The moment we login, session is created for a login user. Okay. So this session, whatever is set during the session, like my country, my locale, my name, my user ID, whatever it is, that will live across till that session is active. Once I log out, all the data, whatever has been stored for a particular session, will disappear. Every session has a session ID, and that ID remains active till my session is alive. So that is those are the scope of component, which is session. So for example, I'll give you a session for component. For example, we have this profile. Profile is a session component. Profile cannot be global component, because if the profile is global component, I log in, you when you log in, both of us log in together, there is a conflict. We need a particular session for me and a separate session for you. So that's why the profile component will be session scoped component. Global component are generally those components where we write our handlers or our service classes. Those are global component where we do not set any value as per the latest trend and as per the coding rule. No global component should set any value. Value should be set in session component so that it lives throughout the session. And the third one is request component. That will be alive only for the particular request. So suppose for a request component, I say login form handler. So for login purpose, I just need all the data till I log in, and then that can disappear. So that is the request scope component. So in ATG, we have two more things called as droplet and form handlers. So these are the name subdivision of components. So droplet in itself also is a component. Form handler in itself is also a component. But form handler is always a request scope component because it takes the data from the form and submits it to the hand. That's it. After that, it can die. I mean, it's not. We don't need that request anymore, right? Once we capture the data, that we don't need a request. Droplet is mostly global scope component because droplets help us to load the pages dynamically. Okay, droplets are called on the page load. Form handlers are called only when we click on a button for a form, that what I need to do for a particular form, then only the form handlers are called. Droplets will be always global scope component and form handlers can always be request scope component. It does not mean that there is a rule set for these. For various requirement, we can do the tweaking. We can create a request scope droplet. We can create a global scope form handler, but that is not recommended. In such scenario where we don't have any choice, we might go ahead and do that. We are not, since it is a component, there is no restriction to provide the scope. There is no restriction, so we can provide any scope. But the recommendation is form handler will be request scoped, droplet will be uh, global scoped. The component is initialized by Nucleus. Okay. Generally in Java, we do whenever we have to initialize an object, what we do is object obj equal to new object. That's what we do. In ATG, there is no concept of writing new. We don't use new. What we use is we use component initialization. Component initialization, we call the component. The moment we call the component, Nucleus creates a new object for the component then and there. We don't need to do it from our side. And since it is using Hibernate in backend, it doesn't keep on creating the new component every time. If some component is needed now and the same component is needed for another class, it might reuse the same instance. So ATG is allowing us to create multiple components. Few of the components they provide out of the box, we can use them directly. But if we want to do some changes, if it is not fitting our own requirement, then in that case, we go and create our own component. So these are the basic thing of the component. And when we start this topic in full detail, I can tell you how to write the droplet. I can go ahead and tell you how to write the form handler. I will give you the entire flow from droplet to the repositories, so that and it's an end-to-end process. And we will be going through the CRUD operation: create, remove, update, delete. Okay. So these things we will be using to understand the entire ATG concept. Apart from this ATG concept, we can also talk about installations, but installation generally we don't go through because every project has different way of using ATG. They have a different way of building ATG. There is no one specific way. People go ahead with they use EAR. People can go and create jars. So depends on the project to project. We think about how the installation is done and how we are using to build it. People use Maven, people can use Ant scripts in order to build the ATG EARs. We can, and there are what all types of profiles ATG provides. We will go ahead and discuss this in detail in next of the classes. Apart from this, so this was what I wanted to cover today, like a basic of what actually ATG is and how are we going to move forward. Now let's talk about something with ATG. You can enhance your career by going through the certifications. So Oracle provides this web commerce ATG certification for developer as well as for specialist. So that depends on your career level and that depends on what you want to pursue. You can go ahead and take the certification. These are This will cost around 18,000 rupees, and you can schedule the certification with ATG. But this can only be done once we know all the basic concepts of ATG and what ATG has to provide in it. There are various versions of ATG which keeps on changing. For example, it started with 6, then slowly went to 10, 10.1, 10.1.2. Now currently we are on 10.11.3.2. And with every version, there are some changes on ATG. Like for 11.2, we were using REST API. From 11.3, we are using JAX-RS, we are using Angular. So these things are there, and we can cover the basic part, and we can cover the concepts, so that when you go ahead and look at the code, you are aware of what actually it's doing. So that we can determine with this entire course, and I hope this will enhance your career in a better way. So thank you for attending this demo, and do share your feedback and contact us for any queries related to the scope, schedule, reference cost, and payment options. Thank you.